Alright, this is Mr. McMurray again, just to rehash where we were last time. We've been talking about the types of blood vessels. This is an artery. Arteries have thicker walls, especially this layer of muscle, a very thick layer of muscle. This allows them, when the high pressure blood comes through, it can expand, and then it pushes back. And when it snaps back into place, it helps push the blood farther on down the line. Okay. Capillaries, we said, are single cell thick. There's just one, the outside layer is only one single cell, and that's how things can easily diffuse in and out. Oxygen out, carbon dioxide in, food out, nutrients out, and waste products in. And that's because it's very, very thin. We said white blood cells can crawl in and out of the blood cells, diapedesis, and once again, that's why it's very easy to do that in the capillaries. Now, veins, on the other hand, do not have as big of a muscle wall here, but they actually have a bigger lumen or open area that allows more blood to come through. But since it's less pressure, it does not flow as fast, so it still ends up being the same amount of blood going out in the arteries, hopefully, as they're coming back in the veins. Now, a couple other things about veins. Since veins have very low pressure, they have these little flaps or valves in them. Okay, so anytime you see the valves, that's a tip off right there. This must be a vein. Alright, so how do these veins work? Look at these veins. These are located on the leg of this particular veins. As it's going back, first of all, the blood flows up. But should the blood try to come back this way, because it doesn't have much pressure, and if we're not really going up very strongly, if it tries to come back, it will push the valve shut. Swinging doors. They open one way, but if you're coming up this direction, they open up. But if you come back, it pushes them shut against each other and will not let it go through. Kind of like the semilunar pulmonary valves. But now, and the semilunar valves, very similar. But these flaps are in the blood vessels. So it keeps the blood and can't come back the opposite direction. All right. Now, another thing happens, though, as you're moving, as your muscles, not these muscles around the vein, but the actual muscles in the leg, as they're moving around, they massage or squeeze on the veins and help push the blood. And since the blood can only go one direction, when it gets squeezed by the muscles, if the muscles squeeze here and squeeze here, it's going to push the blood up because the blood can't come back. And so the more you move, the more it squeezes those muscles and helps keep the blood from the veins coming back. If you stand still, if you have a job where you work standing up or sitting at a desk all day, your feet may begin to swell. Why? Because a lot of the blood and fluids are having a hard time coming back up to the heart. Okay? Now, the lowest pressure blood is going to be these veins when they're coming way back up here and getting almost to the heart. Remember, they got pumped out here, they went all the way down here, they're coming all the way back up, and so they don't have much push at all left to them, and so they need help they can get. Okay? And one of the things happens that when the lungs inflate and your diaphragm contracts, it lowers the air pressure in here, which makes it like between when you're breathing, it makes like a vacuum, and it helps suck the blood in that last little. Think of a long-distance runner just stumbling, trying to get to that last finish line, and whoosh, there's a gust of air that just sweeps them in across the finish line. Well, that's kind of what it does. This is called the respiratory pump. Okay, it's not actually a pump, but what we're just saying is that movement of your diaphragm and your lungs creates a vacuum in there that low pressure that allows the vena cava to fill with blood and to fill into the right atrium. Okay, that last little bit. All right. Now, kind of in line with that, let's talk about varicose veins. No, it's not varicose arteries, it's always varicose veins. You may have heard this. People are older, particularly, or have had injuries to their legs in the past. A lot of times we'll have big, you think about the blue little finger like veins, but sometimes there'll be very big veins standing out on the side of the leg. All right, and these are varicose veins. And generally this is worse on people that as you get older, because your heart's not pumping as well, so the blood tends to not want to go back up as well. Also, if you're standing on your feet or sitting at your desk all the time, so your muscles aren't massaging the blood back up here. So what happens is you tend to get where the blood tends to pool at the hands and particularly the feet, away from the body, the periphery basically. The blood kind of pools and doesn't come back up like it should. The venous valves here eventually wear out and start not working very well, so they let the blood go back, so it doesn't work very good. And of course, since you got all this blood building up here, the varicose veins start to swell and they start standing out on the side of the leg, and you can see them like that. Okay? Now, the varicose veins themselves are not deadly. The problem is that as you get this blood pooling and not moving very fast, decreased blood flow, it's going very slowly, it's more likely to clot. All right? And a clot in your leg would not be good, but what's really bad is if that clot or thrombus breaks loose and becomes an embolus, now you've got a floating clot going down. Now, it usually doesn't get caught in your veins because it's going bigger and bigger and bigger veins back to the heart, but then when it gets pumped, it's either going to get plugged in the lungs, which is going to give you pulmonary embolus, which blocks off part of your tissue in your lungs, so no longer, ironically, get oxygen or blood or food and stuff in the blood and could eventually die off. You could go up to your brain, in which case you could have a stroke, or it could go to one of the blood vessels in your heart where it could clog it up. As they get smaller and smaller, it'll get to one that clogs up finally, and you could have a coronary heart attack or the myocardial infarction that we talked about the other day. Okay, so that is really the danger. Not so much of the varicose veins themselves or even the clot down the leg, but if that clot breaks loose and becomes an embolus, there's no telling where it might end up and what kind of damage it could do. I'd like to talk about fetal circulation. It just means the circulation of blood in the fetus. In fetus, it's a little bit different. We've talked about some of these things before, but we're going to tie them all together. Okay. First thing that's different in the fetus is the most oxygen is in the umbilical vein. It's coming back from the mother where it's picked up oxygen in the placenta. In most humans, adults, whatever, you'd expect the pulmonary veins to have the most oxygen because they're coming back from the lungs and they have all this oxygen. However, in the fetus, notice that blood is blue, okay, it's going to have the most coming up from the umbilical cord. Okay, that's where the reddish blood or the most oxygenated blood is going to be. All right. Now, there's a couple things. There is a ductus venosa. Okay. When you get up toward the liver, there's a little pathway here that allows the blood, instead of it all going through the liver, because the liver is immature, not really doing its own job yet, your mother is still filtering the blood for poison and stuff like that, so you're kind of protected by hers. There's this duct, instead of all this blood from the stomach area going into the liver and being filtered, it just goes, skips that, and goes right back up into the inferior vena cava and back to your heart, because the blood's already been kind of filtered by the mom, or hopefully on any of those poisons or whatever. Certainly the baby has not ingested anything, so it really doesn't need to go to the liver. All right. Also, we said the lungs do not really need to allow blood to go up to the lungs. Just a little bit. They do need lungs, enough blood to keep the lungs alive. Notice that the pulmonary arteries have more oxygen once they go and bring oxygen to it. The pulmonary veins coming back or have less oxygen because they've been taking oxygen to the lungs, which will not be the case once it's an adult. But you don't need all that blood to go to the lungs. There's a couple of ways it can bypass it. The first one is the foramen. We know means a hole, oval. So there's an oval hole that goes from the right atrium and it comes right out the other side in the left. So it kind of goes behind these two blood vessels here, and it just comes straight out here into the left atrium. So it just bypasses going to the ventricles, going to the lungs at all, and just goes straight from one atrium to the other. That's the foramen ovale. Now remember, this is later the brain went dead. Fossa ovalis. All right, and that is later where you can see where this used to be, but it should close up once you become an adult. Okay, and let all the blood go through, because now as an adult you want all your blood to go to the lungs and pick up oxygen. After you've been born, within a couple weeks that starts closing up. All right, you also have another thing up here. Notice when the pulmonary artery comes out, most of the blood right down the middle is going to go straight up into the aorta. All right, some will go off to each of the pulmonary arteries and carry blood to the lungs, but a lot of it, the biggest part, is going to go straight up here into the aorta and go straight back out to the body again, because there's no point in sending it to the lungs because they're not 100% mature, they're not having any oxygen in them, so it might as well just send it back to the rest of the body. Later, remember, this shrivels up and becomes a ligament that holds some of the artery, the pulmonary trunk, and the aorta here together, and it is called the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay, the ligamentum, this becomes a ligament. Now it's a duct or an opening that allows stuff to go. Okay, and once again, lets it bypass the lungs. All right. Are vital signs. Vital meaning very important. So these are things that very often EMTs, doctors, nurses, etc., when you go to the doctor, will always check these things. Some of them more than others. First one is respiration rate. Respiration has to do with breathing. So basically, how quickly are they breathing? Particularly if someone's in an accident or something like that, that's what will tell them, are they breathing normally? Okay. Obviously, if they're not, then CPR might be in cause or whatever. If it's low or whatever, that's something they need to know too, so they can tell the doctors coming up in the emergency room what to expect. Okay, so the respiration is just at which they're breathing. All right, body temperature. All right, anytime you go to the doctor, one of the first thing they do is take your body temperature. Indication of are you healthy, or you have a fever, infection of some sort, something like that. Now it's COVID virus. That's one of the main things to do to just thing to check quickly. Obviously, if you have a body temperature, then it might be worth checking out and being tested. When we have respiration rate, body temperature, and then pulse. Pulse is, we think about taking your pulse, basically you feel how many times your heart is beating per minute. But what you're really measuring is the pressure wave caused by the ventricles contracting, or your systolic or systole circulation. When your ventricles contract, they push the blood through your veins, and you feel that pulse or pressure coming through as the pulse. Now, you're measuring the high pressure or systolic pressure. All right, in between pulses, what you're not feeling when you don't feel the pulse is the diastolic, or the lower pressure number. And so it's important, obviously, ways to take and see how well your heart's beating, if you have a pulse, if there's anything irregular about it, things like that. Now, pulse can also be important because not only for if you're actually trying to find the pulse. For example, there's lots of different places you can take pulses at. Okay, normally we think of on the wrist, which is the radial artery. You could also do it in the arm on the brachial artery. Carotid artery on your neck is also fairly easy to do. Temporal artery on the side of your head, you could do that. Femoral artery, kind of in the groin area where the big femoral artery branches off. Popliteal behind your knee, and dorsalis pes artery, which is basically here on top of your ankle. It's very similar to what we're doing on your radius, just on your leg. All right. And so it says, well, really, what are the odds I'm ever going to take the pulse in any of those places? And it's true, you're not. Okay, but those are important because pulse sites are also known as pressure points. In other words, places where you could apply pressure to reduce the bleeding. For example, if someone had a bad leg injury, amputated chopped off the leg or something like that, then you could put pressure maybe at the femoral artery or popliteal artery to stop the bleeding. Okay, an idea of a tourniquet where you wrap something around the leg and tie it off. Okay, where it cuts off the circulation from these is the same general principle. But if you can push on the artery and the pressure points, then you can cut off the blood flow, okay, and perhaps help keep them alive until emergency help can get there and they can take action. Otherwise, they may bleed to death first. And so they are important not only as pulse, finding the pulse, but also for and heart rate, but also for stopping blood flow. And the last vital sign that they often take is the blood pressure, otherwise known as the arterial pressure, because you're really measuring how high the arterial pressure is, which is the pulse when it comes to the arteries. Why do we not measure the venous pressure or in the veins? Well, basically, because it's such a low pressure, it's hard to do it. You can't really measure that surge like you can, and so that's why they always put the little thing on your arm over kind of your brachial artery coming through your elbow there, and that way they can get the pressure from that artery. All right, so it's arterial pressure that we're measuring, not venous pressure, because it's very low. And if you think about it, where are you going to have the highest pressure? If we look at this drawing of the heart, obviously the highest pressure is going to be coming out of the aorta, because that's where it's got the full beat here. So the carotid has a very nice pressure, that's why you can feel it so well. And coming down here, a lot of times it's just easiest to find it on the wrist, okay? But basically, into the arteries, and the closer you are to the heart, the farther you get from the heart, you would expect the pressure to be less, okay? Now, the veins, once again, it goes through, by the time the blood gets to the arteries, it goes through single, small capillaries and gets back to veins, it has very little pressure. So probably the least pressure is going to be at the vena cava coming back to the heart.